Welcome to the Consciousness Anywhere and Everywhere podcast. I am Shannon O'Hara, and I invite you to a completely new world of possibilities. Welcome, everybody, to the Consciousness Anywhere and Everywhere podcast. Today, I am so excited and so pumped because I have the great privilege and such an honor to have Zach Bush on the podcast. Zach, thank you so much for saying yes and taking this time.
I'm thrilled to be with you and the whole audience. It's exciting to be connected.
So I have to tell you guys a little bit about Zach before we jump in. So Zach, I first sort of found you at the beginning of last year, at 2020, when everything was just, I would say the shit was hitting the fan and everything was going really intense. And somebody recommended something of yours. And I've actually since tried to go find what it was that I listened to that first time that like totally blew my mind. And I cannot find it for the life of me. If I do, it's definitely going to be in the show notes for this podcast, all of Zach's resources, ways to get more access to, quite frankly, your profound body of work will be in the show notes. But listening to you was like the first time that the spell was broken for me. You gave me a sense of peace, a sense of hope, and this sort of clarity about a lot of the intensity and frankly, insanity that was going on at the beginning of last year. And of course, has continued on. So really, thank you from the bottom of my heart for speaking up and being such a brilliant voice.
Yeah, it's an honor to be a part of it. I think that when I'm doing my best work, I'm speaking for humanity and less from my wisdom and more from everyone.
And you have such generosity in what you share. And frankly, you're really, really smart, which is like a breath of fresh air for me. You actually were the first person who like taught me what viruses actually were.
Yes, it's interesting how few of us are aware of that these days.
Well, when the whole stuff, the you know what stuff started happening, I was like, I don't even know what they're talking about. I need to get educated. Like, this is an area I have no, so I really needed to find out what was for me. And you were a really big part of that. So you are extremely diverse. You have a lot of different paths that you're facilitating amazing work with. So it was sort of like, I wondered where to start with you today, but where I would love to begin is sort of like, what's up for you now? What are you what are you most excited about?
Yeah, it's a huge topic to tackle in some ways, but we'll begin with just this idea that's been percolating for, I think, since probably I was a child. And for every one of us, I think it probably started at about the same time, but it has reached a fever pitch in my life of this awareness that we are half alive. We have been taught and trained into a society, into relationships, into a shape of and form of addiction to codependence in our lives that is keeping us at half-mast. We cannot tap all the way into our full awareness, our full sense of literally being alive, that vivid experience of fully plugged in, that electricity that runs through you when you find that honest connection, that just full connection to source. When you are lit up and you feel that electricity under your skin, we can get there for moments, and then the world tears us out of that with fear, guilt, and other forms of emotional codependence that has created a very insidious version of relating to the world, if you will. And there's a incredible body of work called The Course of Miracles. I'm sure many of you are aware of that, but The Course of Miracles does an extraordinary job of explaining how these special relationships or these exclusive beliefs around relationships to things or people or family have kept us locked in this plane of existence that is really defeating us in our own experience. Our own experience suggests that we are not powerful. Our own experience suggests we are not enough. Our own experience suggests that we are lacking something. Our own experience suggests we don't have everything that people around us have, whether it be emotional intelligence or social skills or intellectual capacity or financial success. We are always looking for this evidence that we are not performing well and we are not good at life. And so we have this self-defeatist program running that is looking for rationale or, evidence that in fact we should remain in this half state. And so as we talk about, self-love and all these things, we need to do self-care, self-love, all these things. I feel like that was a stepping stone to the real calling. We need to do self-connection. We need to absolutely go vertical with our connection to source. You look at a dolphin jumping out of the water. These spinner dolphins that we see a lot out on the ocean. That dolphin is 100% on. That dolphin does not doubt why it's here, what it feels like to be dolphin. If you've ever seen a rabbit running through the wild, I love the way that rabbits are alive. I've got a bunch of them around my property in Virginia, kind of semi-mountainous region, and you've got lots of woods and the trees and meadows and all of this, and the rabbits are so uber alert. They're twitching whiskers and they're sensing life around them. And easy to think, oh, rabbits are afraid and they're skittish and all that. I think I get this sense when I'm out in the woods quietly and I see a rabbit and I can approach it and I see it knowing that I'm approaching, and it's not at all afraid of me. It knows exactly what's going on. And what it's waiting for is this joyful moment when it gets to tell me what rabbit is. Rabbit is this explosive joy that just wants to run and wants to show me how slow I am and wants to show me how explosively fun it is to tear through the woods and dodge back and forth. It's looking for an excuse to show its full potential, its speed, its alertness, its agility. And so I want to become more rabbit myself. What does it feel like to be Zach that's engaging with humanity so much so that I'm looking for every opportunity to, with my full potential, light up with my joy of running through the woods or, exploring the world around me, sensing the world around me. I want my whiskers twitching all the time.
You are somebody who you obviously have like a very, you really get how you're connected to the earth, but I feel like saying connected to the earth is sort of, it's easy to disregard what that means, because it's that sense of being able to perceive the animals and like actually get that what they be is a gift and that it can teach you. Like there's not a lot of people really receiving from a rabbit to the point where they actually like value that contribution on the planet. And listening to a lot of the other things that I've listened to where you're speaking, you have a profound connection, like down to the most micro level of our interconnectedness as embodied beings to the planet, and how relative the planet's health and well-being is to the source of us having life on Earth. So it's interesting where you started this conversation about how the way you put it about how we're sort of a lot of people are walking around half alive. I would even say like maybe even less than half alive. A lot of times this is what's going on. And when we hear you talking about this, I think a lot of people can relate to that, of course. And so it's like, the question is like, okay, so if you recognize you're living underneath, you're drowning underneath the pressures of this reality, then what? What's the choice today?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a profoundly important question because it's the one we all need to wake up with every day, because it's going to be every day. The way in which I engage the world today, the way in which I'm going to reach that full potential is going to be different than yesterday. And where we need to break out of the dogma of religious experience, religious belief. We need to break out of the dogma of, sadly now I have to say there's dogma in science. There's dogma in social, political environments.
Can I say thank you so much for saying that?
It shouldn't be possible. Like science is inherently a area of philosophy that should completely resist dogma by its nature. And yet it's been disempowered to be able to be utilized as a tool of dogmatic thought process. And the pharmaceutical industry has been expert at teaching this kind of disempowered version of science where there's this constant demonstration of the inadequacy of being alive. Therefore, you need all of these drugs to help you.
I like the way you put it. Totally, yes.
And so it's just this phenomenally ridiculous premise that somehow humanity is waiting for pharmaceutical companies to come up with a technological solution to being alive. It's like, wait, what? Let's just be the right thing. It's a broken premise. But the way in which they reach that is by controlling education of physicians globally. And that has been since 1910. The big shift happened in 1910 with the Flexner Report. So 110 years ago, the Flexner Report was commissioned by some of the wealthy robber barons, kind of railroad wealth and all of this. It was the Rockefellers that really put this report into commission state. And it was one doctor who was commissioned to write a report as to why all other forms of medicine outside of allopathic pharmaceutical medicine were were
witchcraft.
So he discredited herbalism, osteopathy, energy medicines of all sorts, acupuncture and the like, qigong, Asian medicine, ancient Chinese medicine. All of that got just one simple report. And at that moment, the U.S. government adjusted its attitude towards all of this with that Flex report commissioned by a private citizen who owned the largest amount of the oil and gas industry wealth that was pouring into the country. And so what they had discovered in the years before the Flexner report is that while oil and gas was a very valuable commodity, they realized they could take tiny amounts of chemicals out of the fossil fuels and turn them into unique chemicals that would interact with biology and sell them at millions of times the profit value. Because now it's like a gallon of gas is $4. Well, like that same gallon of gas can make thousands and thousands of dollars of chemical compounds for biologic manipulation. And so that's what led to the Flexner report. Was like, man, if the chemical industry could really become the foundation of the American economy instead of the oil and gas industry, they'd win the game. And that's exactly what they succeeded in. And so if you look, just 60, 70 years after that, the pharmaceutical / Western medicine paradigm, the American healthcare system became the biggest industry. Today, we spend about $4 trillion in healthcare in the United States alone. We spend only $680-700 billion on all of our military spending and the like. So we're 5 times more expensive than the entire military is this chemical industry. The oil and gas industry is at about 2.6 trillion. So double that and you're at the chemical industry. So the Flexner report succeeded. Rockefeller succeeded. We won the game when we figured out we could create this codependent, chemical agency, and that took over the education system. So by the 1950s, certainly post-World War II, with the debut of penicillin and the antibiotics, we had a great narrative, which was technology was going to save the problem of humanity, which was that humanity was in a constant battle with nature itself, and nature was trying to take us down, and we were going to mount chemical warfare against nature. And so when we turned our warfare type attitude away from one another and started targeting nature, that's obviously when we started to accelerate the destruction of all of the farmland in the world. We're now at 97% of farmland globally is either depleted or severely depleted in nutrients and carbon. The earth can no longer breathe. That's why CO2 is accumulating, methane's accumulating, nitrogen's accumulating in our atmosphere, because the earth can no longer breathe. We've killed her lungs with the chemical industry. And so I would argue the same thing for humanity. What are we really dying from in the last couple of years? We know it's not a virus that's killing us. It's actually the chronic diseases that have emerged from chemical codependence in our food system, in our pharmaceutical industries, in our excuse for a healthcare system. We know chronic disease is why people die. And we say that on the news, everybody's saying, well, if you're obese and diabetic and all of this stuff, then you're likely to die from any sort of pandemic, but certainly this one. And so the viruses, if they're doing anything, are showing us a path forward. They're uncovering our massive vulnerability that we've developed as a species in our codependence on somebody else. And this is what it's like to be half alive at best.
And I love I love that way of looking at it. Absolutely. It's a possibility rather than a problem. And can we take a few steps back? I mean, you said so much stuff. Gosh, never mind. Let's keep going. Okay. So what are the possibilities now? So what are the actions?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I probably failed to answer that now that I realize that you'd asked today. And I probably started down that pathway and then on a meandering path there. But the journey into being alive is, first of all, learning to silence the chatter in your head. The primary methodology of programming that is keeping you locked in a disempowered state, keeping you locked in a belief system of codependence, keeping you locked in a belief system of inadequacy, is through this psychological chatter that has been put into your mind. And the discipline of reaching this silent point where you listen to something other than your brain, it takes a lot of practice to get there. And I think I'm probably just scratching the surface in my own life of my ability to do this, but scratching the surface feels freaking amazing. I can tell you, you start to really feel alive in this core center of yourself. If you have never done this work and you've never tried to do deep meditation or silence in the mind, for me, I'm very spatially aware. And so when I try to learn something or, talking to somebody, I'm always organizing information spatially around my body. And so for me, it's helpful to know where to listen to. And so I think, if you're going down a Taoist or a Buddhist track, it's really, pay attention to the nothingness and reach that state of nothingness. I find that extremely challenging as an entry point. I think you can get there once you've found that voice within the silence. But for me, it was very helpful. I was working with a group up in northern Minnesota for a while, or Michigan, and the experience was very, very lovely because it basically taught a language of awareness, and it was called Core Living. And the language was really to speak from your true self, your core self, your soul space. And to do this, you need to learn how to speak without saying it, if, shouldn't, couldn't, any negative framing of a sentence means you're speaking from the mind, the disempowered mind. And so to learn how to speak positively from a proactive space within your body is a very interesting tool. And it's a very interesting practice, because when you start to pay attention to your words, you'll find out that the vast majority of things you say are framed in the negative. There's an example of it. I was handed a journal at an event this past weekend, and the journal had a cover on it that said "Nothing without intention." And I looked at it with just such humor of like, this is the most ridiculous thing. Like, I understand what they mean, but what they mean is everything with intention. And so when you say nothing without intention, you have so disempowered the experience, because you started with the word no and the nothing there without. So now you have nothing and you are without. And then you have this thing called intention at the bottom. And so you've so taken what, whereas if you say everything with intention, it lights that experience up. Everything is the law of oneness. That is the right foundation. With connected intention, source of inspiration. So we speak in these negatives, these double negatives all the time to try to say something positive. And by doing that, we really cripple the energy within our words, which is the energy within our expression or our experience of being alive.
So I like that, to actually be aware of what you're saying and the words that you're using when you're thinking. That actually could make a huge difference. That's something that I agree with 100%. And it's a phenomenon, if you guys actually start paying attention to every single word that you say or every single word that you think, do you actually know what you mean when you're saying them? And if you don't, go to a dictionary prior 1942, because that's when they started changing the definitions of words after World War II, and look at an old dictionary and look up what you're saying means. It is profound how much more awareness that can bring to the tools and the words that you're using that are creating your reality. So Zach, do you know what makes you different? You're like the most different doctor I've ever met.
I'm not sure all of the layers of that, but certainly one of them is that I became aware of the limitations of my knowledge base. And when I say about the human knowledge that was pumped into me, so I went through an inordinate amount of education, not because I was good at everything. It was because I was probably not good at things that I kept pursuing more education. So, in fact, when if you back up to the beginning of my life, I didn't know that I was capable of being a doctor or that I'd want to be a doctor. I was a mechanic and I was a landscaper. My first jobs were in construction. I was always working with my hands. I came out of a very blue collar experience myself. I came out of a very modest, home in Colorado. I grew up in low income housing projects, and I was on government, food stamps and all of that with my family and growing up. And so humble beginnings, I guess. But when you're a kid, you don't know that. Life is so vibrant when you're a kid. You don't have perspective on wealth or lack thereof. So I had a wonderful childhood. My parents are extraordinarily loving people and were very much exploring spirituality when I came into their lives. And they had just, found a spiritual pathway through the Jesus movement of the hippie, period there in the late 60s, early 70s. And so they were going through their own spiritual exploration, and they helped to really develop a church, a little home church in Colorado that I grew up in, which was, based on Old Testament kind of, or New Testament versions there. In the book of Acts, it describes a church without pastors and without, hierarchical leadership. So there was a group of elders and a group of deacons that helped managed the leadership of the church and shared the teaching, and everybody in the congregation was expected to do a sermon at some point. So we gave there was a small mini sermon for the breaking of the bread or for the communion, and so all of us within the church would share the responsibility of giving those communion sermons, and then one of the elders would share a more in-depth one later in the service. So it's 15, 20 minute, 10 to 20 minute kind of thing that you're sharing. And so by the time I was 14 or 15, I'd been cycled into this thing, and I was the oldest kid in the church. There's probably 120 families in the church. And so I happened to just be kind of on this, oldest kid, oldest kind of son phenomenon. And so I took that on as a persona. I took on that personality of knowing scripture. And so I studied scripture endlessly. I read the Bible from cover to cover multiple times. And I came to be very confident and pretty damn good at debate around spiritual things. I thought I was pleased with my kind of body of knowledge that I collected. And then I ended up having an experience during the last year of my high school experience where I got a girlfriend for the first time, and sort of fell in love as much as you can when you're 18 years old and half alive, but had this experience. And then she cheated on me and broke up with me. And I was only as dramatic as you can be at 18 years old, decided I was totally heartbroken and needed to take a year off. And so I had been hoping to go into engineering. I'd applied to an engineering program and got accepted at the University of Colorado. And so I had planned to do that. But then this happened. I was like, I need to take a year off. I need to find out who I am, blah, blah, blah. So very dramatic, but the universe doesn't waste a second. When it saw that opening, when it said Zach's going to take an opportunity to listen to a different space, my aunt called minutes later after I'd made this decision, who I'd really never talked to much, but had hung out with my cousins when I was younger, but I hadn't heard from her in years. And she was telling me about what's going on in the Philippines. They'd been living there, and that there was a group of international midwives that needed volunteers, and offered me an opportunity to go and volunteer in a midwifery clinic over there. And so I said, well, I have no medical background, which was absolutely true. I didn't even know what midwifery was. Sounded like really short people, midwives or something. So went into this space, eyes completely wide open, but completely naive and clueless. And, just so many amazing things happen there in the Philippines. But, one of the extraordinary things is when I birthed a baby alone for the first time, I was in the back of a van at 4:00 in the morning. This woman had showed up on our doorstep, bleeding out, hemorrhaging vaginally. And she had been born very neurologically damaged. And so she was nonverbal, disoriented, very disabled human being who'd been raped and had become pregnant in the squats of the Philippines. And so a tragic situation just in the framework of it. So she's crying, doesn't know what's going on, doesn't understand she's pregnant, doesn't understand why she's bleeding. And we'd never seen her before. So we were certainly unequipped to try to figure out what was going on in our little midwifery clinic. So put her in this old van, and where my aunt knows where the hospital is across the city. So she's rushing through these dark streets, and I'm in the back with this woman, and she's laying on her back on the bench seat of the van. And I'm holding a towel just to try to, contain the bleeding. And then suddenly she's contracting, and this tiny premature baby is born into my hand. That's, fits in my hand, toes here, head here. The smallest little creature that I'd ever imagined comes out of this woman. And it is so perfect. Like, even in the flashing kind of lights coming in directly through the windows of the van, I'm just like in awe of the fingernails. Like, you're pretty sure you cannot see them because they're so small. They're these little dots of perfect flesh of these fingernails. Like, I can't explain how tiny this thing was. Perfect. The perfection of design of this little blue baby. Wasn't breathing, just blue, and umbilical cord. Like, it was so overwhelming neurologically to take in the beauty, the terror, the hopelessness of this situation. And then suddenly the baby started to pink up and took a deep breath and gave a scream. And it was the tiniest little scream that you've ever heard. It was just this, but it was perfect. It's exactly what you would expect a newborn scream to be with, but picture it at 1% because it's just so tiny. It wasn't weak. It was tiny. And the strength of spirit that it would take a soul to show up in a woman who had been raped, who was nonverbal, mentally handicapped, to show up, to be born in the back of a van, hemorrhaging woman, to be born into the hand of a clueless 19-year-old white kid, what the fuck is going on in the world.
Well, you had some skills, obviously.
I did nothing. Like
courage, serious courage.
Done it. So I was there to witness this thing.
Wow.
Soul cried out with this voice, and to this day, it just gives me this sense of just, again, how little I am living. The drive for life within that infant was so would overcome all of the blocks and everything else just to declare its voice. And that baby ended up dying a few days later.
Right.
Too premature to be able to breathe, all the things.
Right.
That soul came in to be fully alive in that impossible moment, to declare a voice that says, this is what it feels like to be alive. This is being a rabbit right here. Boom. I breathe. I scream. I breathe. I scream. I see. I know. I got to see the light of earth. I came through a portal of a woman, and I went from an infinite being to be squished down into this incredibly tiny flesh suit so that I could experience temporal flesh time. I suddenly went from the infinite to the finite so that I could see the beauty from a different angle. In a finite body, you have the ability to see in a time continuum. You get to experience gravity and what that feels like. You get to experience the smell of Mother Earth. You get to experience the sound of your mother's heartbeat in the womb. Can you imagine that 9 months of that baby in that womb of that child? Of course, it was premature, so maybe only 4 months in there, 5 months. That 5 months, that baby was in a woman that could not be programmed with the current paradigm. Logically injured. And so she was just a being. She was a pure being, and she was loving, and she was cheerful. Despite not being able to talk or understand things, she was cheerful. You see this in Down syndrome, an example of joy. These children with Down syndrome cannot be programmed with the current paradigm. They do not know guilt and they do not know fear because they just know joy.
Totally.
That is what that child decided to bathe itself in. That soul said, I want to experience what it feels like to be in a vibrating human being that just is alive and has no context of the social circumstances, political circumstance. I don't want any of that. I want to be in a woman who's alive, and I want to hear her heartbeat every night while she sleeps. I want to hear the vibration of Mother Earth that I can hear through the wall of the womb. She sleeps outside in a tin shack outside of the Manila. I want to hear the vibration of the trees in those forests. I want to hear the sound of running water through the womb. And then I want to come out for a moment, and I want to see the brightness of light and what it feels like to see the world through the eyes of a human being. That's a huge experience.
And he met you.
It got to
all the people, you.
It got to see this clueless kid, and and it did. Like it was wild. I don't know if many of you have.
But what a gift!
But to be this first thing that a child sees and that comes in the world is daunting and amazing. So all of that experience, I came back from the Philippines realizing that all of my confidence about spirituality and what I knew in the Bible and everything else no longer was relevant. I suddenly knew that I was never going to argue again over somebody's spiritual worldview, or I had been given a small box of understanding that I had tried to master. And no matter how much I mastered that small box of perspective, I was never going to master the whole. I would never even be able to experience the whole through that box. And so that was the beginning of starting to take the walls off of my conviction of what I know. And then over the course of 17 years in academic medicine and learning how to go, everything, I specialized in internal medicine. So I did a lot of ICU hospital work in that. I did, saw a lot of death and dying in the ICUs. And that was another opening where seeing the other side of the spectrum from birth, when you're around death and you find out time and time again that it is not an endpoint. It is a rebirth happening. And this being is launching just as the soul would come out of the womb and see for the first time. We're going to go through that birth canal that we call death, and we're going to come out the other side and see more brilliantly and more beautifully than ever before. And so we have a birth waiting for us.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? What you saw, how you kind of got to that awareness?
Yeah. It's almost too beautiful to explain in some ways. Whatever beauty that the first birth has, it's dwarfed by the beauty of the second. There's so many extraordinary moments, things there. There was this kiddo that I took care of until he died. He was 18 years old when he died. He had been born with osteogenesis imperfecta, which is a genetic condition where the bones cannot calcify properly and they are extremely brittle. And so by the time they're 1 year old, they've fractured hundreds of times, and they'll fracture their ribs by just breathing or coughing. They'll fracture, vertebrae as soon as they learn how to stand up because the weight of the body starts to fracture. So they actually never can really grow to any sort of stature because they've had so many fractures that it disrupts their growth plates. So this 18-year-old was, about the size of a 3-year-old. And his head had grown normally because the skull tends not to fracture as much. And so, basically kind of looks like what you would expect from a dwarf. But the body had been so fractured out that it was, shrunken in a way that is hard to explain. But his face was so bright and vibrant and beautiful, and he was extremely intelligent. And he had become like the most loved kid in his high school. And he was, and as the high school described it, he was their mascot for life. And so this kid was loved by every kid in the high school because he always touched people with how little sense of victimhood he had. Like he had no complaint in the world. And here he was bound in this this kind of makeshift wheelchair that he would be pushed around in, and he would be in such a state of love that he just changed people. And so he got admitted to the ICUs with pneumonia and all this stuff. He had every kid in the high school come visit. It was, over the course of the couple of weeks that he was in there, hundreds of kids came and visited, oftentimes with their parents and, friends, and church members. So just a vibrant human being. And when he began the downward spiral into this death process, I got to see him imparting information to kids and people at the bedside. That was literally him taking on a bigger existence. He was starting to live through the people he was touching. He was passing on his own self into these people in such a beautiful way, the way in which he imparted final gifts to his parents and just wisdom, love, freedom. The ways in which he touched the nurses and doctors that were in the room. He was as close to I've seen a living version of a saint, I think, in that he was so out of fear. He had no fear of what was going to come. And he moved into this process, and his heart stopped one night that I was on, and his parents had a really big struggle with signing a do not resuscitate order, which I totally respect. It's too much to ask of a parent to give up hope on their child at 18 years old. And so I had warned them that if this was going to come to this, that I would probably, crush his chest and, with the most gentle of compressions. And they were aware of this whole thing. But at any rate, his heart stopped, and I just put 3 fingers on his chest to start compressions. And we were pumping drugs into him to restart his heart. And the whole thing is on a ventilator. And the first push that I did, I could feel every rib in his chest break and the sternum go free. And it was nauseating experience on one side. But the amazing thing is there was no chest wall between me and the heart anymore. It was, the sternum was right on top of the mediastinum, or the heart. And so with each compression, I'm feeling nothing. And then that heart started again under my fingers, and I could feel it, which I had given chest compressions many times. You have a huge, thick chest wall that's keeping you from feeling the heart. But I could feel that heart restart. And it didn't make sense to me. I was like, please let go. Don't come back, because I just crushed your chest. And I'm afraid for the pain that you're going to experience. I'm afraid for
this body's not working.
Ability to breathe, because you lose all of your respiratory function when you disrupt the rib cage like that. And the heart restarted, and he came back for a couple more days and never, complained of much more pain or anything else. But he was ventilated for the rest of his life at that point, so he couldn't talk anymore. But he wanted to come back for reasons that I can't calculate. But he looked into his parents' eyes. He looked into my eyes at times where I just felt like there's a five-dimensional chessboard being played here that I can only see the 3-dimensional version here. And it doesn't make sense on this human plane. But this man came back in this body for a couple more heartbeats to pass something on. He saw something on the other side that encouraged him to come back for the extra 2 days. And then he left peacefully, and the experience was so remarkable to me that there was something happening on their side that I could glimpse through his eyes. He came back with clarity. He came back on purpose, never to say another word, but to be present for something that I'm unaware of happening around me. So that was a nonverbal version of what happened many times in the ICUs as people went to the other side of the veil and came back, which happened pretty often, over those many years that I was in the hospital. And when I say pretty often, it was 96% of people that go into cardiac arrest, they die. We resuscitate between 4 and 5% of them in the hospitals when everything goes right. or more likely when they want to come back. Because I don't think we actually ever save a life. I don't think we ever extend life. I think we're here as a tool for those souls to decide how and when they leave. And all of these experiences of people coming back from the other side of the veil, the ones that come back and tell me what they've seen are frustrated with their inability to explain what they are. And so the few words that they do use it, I have to be aware of is I'm limiting by my understanding of the words rather than making myself available to what they saw. And that's why I like this example of this 18-year-old, because he didn't say anything. He somehow expressed, or I got to glimpse the full experience through his beingness. He came back full. He came back feeling different to me. He seemed like he had a new dimension to him. And that's what we're being called to again, just as the child in the Philippines ruptured my sense of Christianity and this box that I had put God in and this thing. The second death thing is breaking apart the hubris of being human. This human experience is not the limitations of who you are, why you even showed up. You are living a purpose on a plane that we cannot see or experience in this body. You are living a purpose that's playing out a balance between the light and dark in the universe. And when I say light and dark, that's not good and evil. It's just two states of beingness. When you are alive, I want you to know that you are living in many places. Your beingness exists in this plane. It exists in lower vibrational planes, if you want to think of it that way, in the soil, in the plants, in the microbes. My lab spends a lot of time studying bacteria, and its extraordinary microbiome, this ecosystem that lives within us, dwarfs the human experience, right? And so I only have 50, 70 trillion cells, and yet I have like 1.4 quadrillion bacteria, and I have 14 quadrillion mitochondria living inside of my cells. So I have this, I'm like 100x microbiome compared to human cell. And so what does it mean to be alive? It means that I am actually a animated ecosystem that has cooperated in a symphony of actions and physiology and biology to become who I am right now. And I'm dancing in a field of soil every day. I have this soil within me that animates every cell, that gives the energy to the cell so that it would be a light producing element within a light being that is trying to communicate love to the universe, reflect back the beauty that she has expressed to us. That's what it feels like to be alive. And so what does it mean all over the place? What does it mean to have this capacity within us and live at half-mast? It means that the universe is crying out to us. I believe that intelligence throughout the universe, down in the soil levels that are responding to you. We know now by studying genomics of the microbiome that your bacteria are responding to your emotional state. They will respond.
Yeah, say more about that.
If you wake up depressed and defeatist and living at half-mast, your microbes adjust to that. Your microbes adjust to try to actually lift you up. There's specific bacteria that have to be present on these little enteric endocrine cells that line your gut lining that make 90% of the serotonin in your body. Those bacteria go present with that endocrine cell to make serotonin to lift you up and say, don't give up today.
Wow.
May come a day where you're going to give up, but it's not today because we're here. We're with you. We're going to support you. And then you get hit with an antibiotic and you destroy the soil within you. And the workforce is diminished. One course of antibiotics increase your likelihood of depression by 24% in the next 12 months. 2 courses of antibiotics within a year increases your risk of major depression by 54%. We are literally destroying the soil that would fuel our minds and our bodies to their full potential of hope. When somebody gives you an antibiotic, it should be joined with a warning that this is going to take away your hope for a moment. Don't take this seriously. You're going to feel a loss of hope. That's not real. That's just me taking away your bacteria for a moment. I want you to go out into the woods. I want you to go out in the soil and I want you to garden, because if you do that, within 30 days, your microbiome will be back and the hope will return.
You said one of the things that I heard you say in that original thing that I listened to that I have to figure out what it was and where I listened to it. But you said breathing in nature increases your microbiome, especially around ferns. And I was like, ping. And literally that day I went to the forest and I prioritize that because it's so simple and it's so easy. And it's like Earth is ready for us to live.
Yeah, she's calling us into it. She wants us to wake up and be fully alive with her. And the why is because we are so sentient. We have an incredible neurologic system that is tuned to the vibrations of Earth. Nobody has to be taught how to appreciate a sunset. We know that's beauty.
Wow.
The cones and rods in our eye are what allow that sunset to be reds and oranges and purples. The sunset is not actually red, orange, and purples. The sunset is a phenomenon of electromagnetic field energy passing through the atmosphere as the sun goes past the edge of the Earth. It has no color to it. It's a vibrational energy that's scattered through the atmosphere of the Earth. It's not until a human eye witnesses that it ascribes it the features of beauty. Why were we created? So that the world, the universe would have another capacity to appreciate the beauty within nature that cannot fully express itself until it's seen. That's amazing. And so under the ferns to reconnect to the microbiome, Mother Earth is designed to stimulate you to your full potential of awareness, to that aliveness. This is why everybody feels better when they go to the beach for a vacation. When you walk barefoot on sand, you have the perfect conductor between the electromagnetic field of Mother Earth and her vibrations and your biologic systems. As soon as you go and put that rubber-soled shoe back on and walk away from the beach, you are insulated away from Mother Earth's vibe. Are not vibing with her. You're vibing to your Instagram account. You're vibing to this constant data of information through the media and through your social interactions. You're being programmed by the clink of glasses in a bar while you poison your body with alcohol so that you lose your self-identity. These are the things that we've been programmed to do when we're depressed. We go drink, or we go and overeat, or we develop all kinds of techniques for diminishing our power. When we have great experiences, when we celebrate, we go and do the same damn thing. We go to the same bar and we overdrink, lose our self-identity. So whether it be your most low points or your highest points, you've been taught to self-abuse and diminish yourself. What if at the moments of our lowest points, we were trained, you just need to simply plug back into nature, go out in the woods. Yeah. This is what the Achuar tribe does. I just got to spend a couple of weeks down there with a group of us. There's about 14 of us that went down with a group of leadership down there to the Achuar tribe. They were the last indigenous people to be touched by the West. And actually they reached out to the West, which was the first time that's happened. And so the indigenous people contacted the West to tell us in 1994, you need to redream your reality because you're going to kill all of us with the current momentum of what's going on. They had seen in their dream work the destruction of the planet through Western civilization. So they reached out and said, you must change. You must change the dream that you are living within. And when we sat down there with them and talked to them about their experience, what happens when you're having a bad day? What happens when you're not feeling hope or disconnected? Their answer was the same. Everything. It's simple. I just go back out into the rainforest and I sit there and I may engage with plant medicine, or I just re-engage nature and I come back completely reset. Yeah. And I'm okay. If that was the kind of modality we gave, or what if we started to build our most extraordinary milestones of celebration back into nature? What if the graduation celebration was not in some marbled hall of human ingenuity with some microphones and speakers? And what if it was instead in the canyons of Telluride, Colorado, or in the box canyons of New Mexico, in the Red Rocks? What if it was on the heights of mountains? What if we chose to lift our young people up on that day? Today, you graduate from human thought into nature's experience, nature's wisdom. And we hand you back to nature today because we've taught you all that we can think of, which is a scratching of the surface of all of the knowledge that is. And so we hand you to nature today. And so look at these rocks. They are your teachers. Look at the sun, for that is your source. Look at the sky, for that is your hope. That's a graduation experience. We need to graduate from human mindset to nature's wisdom, nature's science. And so we need to rethink all of this. We need to think of the ways in which the fern that you suddenly are drawn to every day becomes the methodology by which we think about connectivity, our purpose. Who are we?
Okay, so let's get to the actions that you're taking. Because a few minutes ago, you said that there was a statement of like, we're going to kill the world. But I would say that's not what you're doing. And that's definitely not what I'm doing. Like, we aren't, yes, the majority. Yes, there is a mass movement towards erosion. And you have a lot of different diverse ways and paths through which you are facilitating change the best way that you know how. What are some actions, some choices, inspirations that we can leave people with?
Yeah, there's lots of ways to engage with stuff that I'm working on and things like that. But I also would invite you to start to engage that quiet space within you. So before you go to my websites, before you go exploring all this, at the end of this moment that we have shared together in this podcast, I would encourage each of you to turn off all your electronics, step outside, take off your shoes, stand bare feet in the snow or in the warmth, wherever you are in the world, on the hot sand. Stand there for a moment and drop into silence. And I think I may have gotten distracted from my own mindset earlier when I was telling you where this voice was, but it's not in your head and it's not in your heart. It's about 6 inches, 8 inches lower. It's kind of between your belly button and the floor of your pelvis is this space where you can find the resonance, find the voice. So take the discipline of moving your mind's eye and your attention down to this core space between your belly button and the floor of your pelvis. Listen in there. And when you listen in there, you're going to start to feel something. Even if you can't understand it yet, you're going to hear a language there that you deeply understand. Go to that space before you start to engage, because you need to deprogram all of the stuff that you're carrying forward, the fears, the guilt. You need to let go of those things to fully engage in your full potential, in that fully alive state. So work on becoming fully alive. And then if you want, further experience from myself and other physicians and scientists, if you go to my website, zachbushmd.com, if you go there, we have the Global Health Education series there. We've done, I think, 13 or 15 of them, something like that now. And starts with the virome, as you were discussing there, Shannon. What is a virus? And it's incredibly beautiful. And it is our path forward. If we do not embrace the virome, we will go extinct. We need to embrace the opportunity for adaptation and biodiversification to happen within our bodies that's allowed by the intelligence of the virome. So we need to re-engage the virome. We need to get into that. But there's a 2-hour special on death and dying and rebirth that you might want to look at that is a couple of death doulas, a neurosurgeon, and a neuropathologist. And we all reflect on what is brain death and what happens after brain death. When do you get into these hyperconsciousness states? How do people come back into brain dead states and be fully conscious and verbal and the stories are mind bending, and they will change your perspective on what are we really fearing when we fear death. So go to these places and really dive in deep with these practitioners and get a new view. The one that's coming up next week is on fertility. The thing that's driving our risk of extinction is our failure to produce. And so we're going to take a deep look at what does it mean to be fertile as a planet, as a species. Why are we undermining infertility on the planet through our chemical warfare on the soil systems? What's its immediate ramifications for our own reproductive capacity? And how are we interlinked with nature's fertility and our own? So it's a beautiful look at that, and we'll look at how this current global mandates for genetic engineering are coming into play here, and how that may affect fertility in the future and the like. So lots to dive into there for you. If you want to take a look at our nonprofit work around farms and agriculture, farmersfootprint.us is the website that you can go to for our biggest project. But the 501c3, the big nonprofit that we have created, is called Project Biome. Farmer's Footprint is an element within Project Biome. So projectbiome.com or .org is the place you can go there, projectbiome.org. We are just launching a new nonprofit in Australia, Project Biome Australia, which will do the same work in bringing storytelling and narrative around regenerative capacity of Mother Earth in our farm systems when we step away from chemical warfare and start to embrace natural cycles within the soil. There's so much for each of us to learn from the soil. If she's that resilient on a farm field, imagine your resilience within your biology to regenerate life within you so that you and I can speed up to this full life being state.
Yes. Awesome. Fucking yes. I love it. I actually just today selected to have a monthly donation to Farmer's Footprint because I actually just found that on your websites are really, there's a lot going on in there. So there's a lot, it takes time to really get through it. Love what you're doing. You are a massive inspiration. The way you talk about the virome is like mind-blowing and actually interesting and like fascinating. So thank you so much for making topics like this that seem so out of reach, like really so interesting. Really, Zach, you are like a miracle worker, such a magic being in the world. I'm so grateful that you exist. Like, thank you so much.
Well, I don't know that I would exist if you weren't there to see me. So thank you for seeing me and making me real.
Well, you're strong and you're doing amazing things and you've really inspired me. So thank you, Zach Bush. Thank you, everybody who's listening. There was so much in this, and what else is possible now? The choice you make today creates the tomorrow. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Zach.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for listening to this show. My target is to make consciousness easy to find and choose. So if you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a 5-star review on iTunes and share this with somebody who you know who might be looking for more consciousness in their life. You can visit me on shannon-o'hara.com or talktotheentities.com. And to learn more about the amazing tools of Access Consciousness, you can visit accessconsciousness.com and be sure to subscribe to the podcast.